All right, so what I have here are 2 pickup sticks that have a hole in the top and the bottom. And I'm gonna use these as leaf sticks on my loom. And these binder rings are gonna help me secure it to my loom so that I can have my cross secured while I am slaying my 2 rigid heddles. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop this off of here and around my loom. I'm gonna start with one side of my cross. I'm gonna just pull it out from where I tucked it while I was at the loom. I'm gonna go ahead and use those ties that I put in to help me find my cross again. So I've got a black one for the bottom and brown for the top. And I did the same on the other side of the cross. So I'm gonna pull up on that brown and it separates out nicely. So I'm just gonna put the 2 points of my pickup sticks through these holes. So I've got one on each side and my cross will be nice and preserved when I secure my pickup sticks. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same for the other half of my warp. Pulling up on those brown strings that I tied in there. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and take those binder rings and just pop them right through those holes. And the reason why I'm using the binder rings is so that the 2 leaf sticks can't go anywhere once they're secured to my loom. I used Ashford pickup sticks, but you could also use the cross sticks from Ashford or leaf sticks from any brand as long as they're the width of your loom. What you're looking for is something that you could suspend between the 2 sides of your loom that have holes in either end. All right, so now let's look at the heddles. I have my front heddle, which is going to be Heddle 1. It's the heddle that's closer to me. I have marked the width of my project, where I'm going to start and where I'm going to end. I'm actually going to start by threading my second heddle. On this one, so that I can help myself tell the difference, I've only marked where I need to start because that's the only one that's going to be important when I'm threading that heddle. Now I'm going to start to use my cross. At this point, because my leaf sticks are secure, I can go ahead and take out these ties on the cross, which will help me spread out my warp to work with it more easily. So now, I'm going to start by pulling the first 2 ends from my cross. So let's separate those out. Because I have a 2-color warp, I want one end that's purple and one end that's going to be blue. So it's actually going to turn into 4 ends when I cut this. So now, I'm going to start by pulling the first 2 ends from my cross. So let's separate those out. Because I have a 2-color warp, I want one end that's purple and one end that's going to be blue. So it's actually going to turn into 4 ends when I cut this. I'm going to start with the slot that I have and pull these through to the back. So I have 2 loops going through this slot because I'm doing double weave. So I have one loop for the top layer and one loop for the bottom layer. I'm gonna go ahead and do that again. I'm using my cross to find the next two to pull through. I'm gonna go ahead and get about an inch of those pulled through. So I'm looking down at my cross to help me separate it out. And just go ahead and pull through. At this point, I've got a good amount of loops through my heddle, and I don't want them to fall back through. So I'm gonna go ahead and open a space by starting at the top leaf stick that's closest to the heddle, and I'm just gonna pull up. I'm gonna put a little tension on my loops, and I've got a big old space here. Now on my knitter's loom, my back apron rod is secure, which means that I can't slide these onto my back apron rod. Instead, I'm gonna take a stick shuttle that's about the same width or the same length as my back apron rod. I'm gonna put it through the loops, and I'm gonna go ahead and brace that on my back apron ties. Now those loops can't go anywhere. And I can just go ahead and continue to pull loops through like I was before, stopping periodically to put them on the back apron rod. All right, so now I have my whole warp pulled through the back of my heddle, and I can go ahead and use these notches on my stick shuttle to latch on to my back apron rod. So I'm just putting it around this plastic tie here so that it'll stay in place. And I'm gonna do that on both sides. And that way I can just go ahead and wind onto my back beam. And I can hold this at an angle so that you can see. All right, here we have a shaft cricket, and the ties on the back apron rod are a little bit different. These are Texsolve, which means that when I'm pulling my loops through, I can just slide these off because they're not anchored to the back apron rod. So while I'm warping my front heddle, I can slide about half of my warp on and then just poke this back through that same hole it came out of, do the other half of my warp, and then slide my loop back onto my back apron rod. And I don't need to brace it with the stick shuttle. If you have a different kind of loom, or if you don't have a stick shuttle that's the same width as your back apron rod, you can always take a dowel or a cross stick or something that's the same width as your back apron rod and lash it on. So to pack my warp, I have this curtain that I just leave on my loom. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that up onto my back beam. And I'm just gonna wind on to my back beam like I usually do. The difference is that I'm gonna leave my leaf sticks here until I have my second heddle completely threaded. And as I go, I'm just gonna let out some of this chain so that I have more to work with. And I'm trying to make sure that everything is flat and I don't have any snags. If you don't have a bamboo curtain, you can always use paper, or you can use the packing strips that came with your loom, or any strips of cardboard that you have laying around. At this point, I can go ahead and take out these choke ties as they come up. And remember, we tied these in bows, which means that we don't have to cut anything. One more turn. All right, and there we go. All right, at this point we're gonna start cutting. If you feel comfortable with how secure your leaf sticks are, you won't need tape. When you're first starting out though, adding a little bit of tape can help add a little bit of peace of mind. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put some tape over the points of these to kind of hold them in place a little bit better. And I'm gonna do the same with the ends over there. I'm gonna add a little bit more tape there. Now I'm using painter's tape so that I don't leave any residue on my loom. All right. So now for the scary part, I'm gonna go ahead and start cutting my warp, and I'm just gonna do a little bit for now. I like to cut it the back of the loops. Some people just go ahead and take a chunk of them and cut them off. Either way is okay. Now, when you look at these slots, you have 4 ends per slot. I'm going to use my cross to help me, and I'm going to take the end that is the closest to the right because I'm right-handed, and that's going to go through the hole in Heddle 2. Now, even though this is Heddle 2, which means it's going to end up as the one in the back of my loom, I can leave this where it's more accessible to me for right now, which is at the front of the loom, just because it's going to be a little bit easier to thread these Heddles. So I'm taking the rightmost from my cross, and I'm going to pull it through and drape these right over the back of my loom. And because I want to do a little bit of playing with color, I'm making sure that they're all going to be blue. All right. Now it's time to think about when we add in that next Heddle. This is going to move backwards. Here are the ends that I just threaded through, and this is going to sit right on top in front. If I don't get rid of these leaf sticks, it's a little hard to get between these 2 Heddles and thread through these holes. So what I'm going to do to make it easier for myself is I'm going to take my whole threads and I'm going to tie them in a slip knot in about 1 inch wide. It doesn't have to be exactly 1 inch. Then I'm going to take the purple ends that are on my top leaf stick. These I'm going to use as my whole threads for Heddle 1, which is going to sit on my front Heddle block. I'm going to pull those right out. I'm going to tie these in a separate slip knot because I want to keep them independent because they're going to go in a different place next time. My slot threads are all going to pull through at the same time, so I don't have to worry about separating those out. I can tie all of those ends together in a little slip knot. And I'm going to repeat that across the Heddle, and I'm going to keep them in sections of about 1 inch, give or take. All right, now that I've finished threading my first Heddle, I can go ahead and get rid of my leaf sticks. So I'm just going to take off the tape and then undo my binder rings. If you don't have binder rings, you can always just use string. I'll go ahead and move those out of the way. So now I'm going to move my Heddle to the back position, and that's where it's going to stay because that's Heddle 2. Heddle 1 is the one that's closest to the weaver. All right. I'm going to start on the right-hand side because I'm right-handed, and I'm going to start by pulling through my slot threads. Now, since I have these all tied up in separate slip knots, it's easy for me to pull this above my Heddle, so it'll be easier to pull down through. And I'm going to start with this one that I marked here. My slot threads are going to come through directly in front of the hole that they're going through already. So it'll be a straight line between the 2 Heddles. And I like to do these in groups the way that they're tied in slip knots because it just makes it a little bit easier for me to remember where they're going to go. So my slot threads go first, just straight on through from where they are already. So these were the 2 warp ends that were on the bottom leaf stick that was closer to me when I was threading these. And I want you to notice that I'm only doing an inch of these for now. And it is a little awkward to get up between those two heddles. We're going to take care of that in just 1 second. Just like before, I'm going to go ahead and tie this in a slip knot. This time I want to try to get close to my first heddle. You'll see why in just 1 second. I want that a little bit closer. That should be good. All right. Next, I'm going to thread my holes for Heddle 2. So my hole threads on my hole threads for Heddle 1 are going to be purple, and I'm going to the right of my first slot. So everything is going to the right because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you can do everything to the left. And you do, of course, want to start on your left-hand side. So again, I'm reaching up between the heddles. This is the purple thread that was left after I pulled my blue thread off of that first lee stick, the top lee stick that was closest to my heddles. All right, I'm going to retie this in a slip knot, but this time I can get a little bit further away from the heddle. All right, and now I have my last bundle, which is these blue ones. These blue ones went through the whole of Heddle 2, which is closer to the back of my loom. It's farther from me. These are going to go to the right of that hole. So if you look down here, I put in my slot thread first, and that went straight between the two heddles, and you'll see that better in just a second. Then I put in my hole thread to the right of that. These are going to go one slot farther over. So this is going to be the only end in that first slot of my reed, of my heddle. Oop. And as you may have noticed, to give myself a little bit more access, I moved my second heddle up to the top position. So for this first section, and it is a little floppy, but it's not going to be a problem in just a second because I'm going to show you another way. Once you have that first inch or so through, that will make it a little bit easier to do the rest of them. So when I tie this slip knot, I want it to be about the same distance or further from my second slip knot. So I'm going to go ahead and just tie that in here. Now I can take my front heddle and I can open it up a little bit. If I loosen this bottom a little bit, I can open it up even more. And that way you'll be able to see exactly where everything is going. I think that's going to be too far. So it's a little bit fussy on the first one, but after that you don't have to worry about it because it'll anchor it in place. So I'm going to let these out a little bit as well. And it just makes it a little bit quicker and a little bit easier to see what you're doing when you open it up. All right. So now that'll lay straight like that, and it'll make it easier for me to do my next group. I'm going to do it in the same order. This time I'm just going to do all of my slot threads from here across. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do my Heddle 1 hole threads, which are in purple. All of these will be purple through here. And then I'll come back lastly and do my hole threads from Heddle 2. So it's in the same order. So I'm going into my next slot. I'm going to go ahead and just pull them all down. And make sure we get both of those threads in there. It's a little bit easier to see from this angle that the slot threads just go straight through from my second heddle to the first heddle. So it's just a straight line from my second heddle to the first. All right, so I just finished threading all of my slots for my Heddle 1. And I want you to notice that I didn't spend any time doing these in slip knots because it's already secure after doing this first inch. Now I'm ready to move on to finishing up all of my hole threads for Heddle 1. So I'm gonna go ahead and it goes to the right of the slot that group was threaded through. So we're just going to go ahead and pull those all through. Alright, so we're all done pulling through our purple hole slots. So those are the ones that go through the holes in Heddle 1. Now I'm going to pull the blue ones through. And remember, they're not going directly through like the slot threads did. They're going to be offset to the right. So I can see here where I put my last thread through, and it's easy to see because I left my slip knot above where I had the one for my hole threads. So it's a little bit easier to tell because they're a little bit higher than the ones for the slot threads, which are the ones that are way down here. So I'm just going to go through to the right of where my original slot thread had gone through. I'm going to pull these last threads, these last ends through. All right, so now that I have all of my slots and holes in both of my Heddles completely slayed, I'm gonna go ahead and do some checks to make sure that everything is where it should be. I'm gonna start with my threads that came through the back Heddle holes. I'm gonna lift my back Heddle up and I'm gonna put some tension on my warp. And what I'm checking for here is that there is one end per slot in the front. I know that it's okay in the back because I had already checked that before I started doing my front Heddle. So it should end one slot before the end of your work. Here's the last hole that I went through. And my last hole, when you go to the right of that in your front Heddle, is one to the right of where your last slot is. So my last slot only has two ends through it. Then I have the whole thread, and all the way across the rest of the way, I should have three ends per slot. We'll take a look at the other side in just a minute. The next thing I want to check is my front Heddle. So again, I'm going to put a little bit of tension here so that I can go through with my finger, or you can use a pickup stick. Your hand will work just as well. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm checking to make sure that I have one end in each hole, and it all looks good. All right. The last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab those hole threads again in the blue, so I'll have all of my hole threads in my hand. Get out of there. There's all of them for the front. And I'm using my other hand to put tension on those slot threads, because that's what I'm going to look for now. I'm going to go ahead and just drape those up over the top. Shouldn't have got rid of my tape. Thank you. All right, so now what I'm looking for is that there's no twisting behind my heddles. And how I'm gonna see that is by pulling down on my slot threads. I should have one of each color through each slot across. And when I pull down, if it doesn't pull either of my hole threads through, then there's no crossing between my heddles. And I can move this heddle forwards a little bit to help me check that. So I'm gonna put some more tension on there. So if you can see between my two heddles, it all looks good. They're all nice and straight across. Nothing is twisted. Now I can go ahead and move to the next step, which is going to be tying onto my front apron rod. All right, so I just wanted to give you a look at the first set of holes and slots. So through the very first slot in the front, there's only one end. On the other end, remember we had two. On the first hole, through all of the holes, there's only one. And then until that last slot, there's going to be 3 ends per slot in the front. In the back, your first slot is empty, so that's behind the first slot in Heddle 1. It's going to be empty in Heddle 2. All the way across, there's going to be 3 ends per slot. So when we get to the last one over here, there's that one that goes through our last hole, and there are 3 ends in our last slot. All right. All right, I'm gonna tie on the same way that I usually do for any method of weaving. If this isn't how you tie on, feel free to tie on however you're comfortable. So I'm gonna start with just a single knot and doing 1 at each end. I like to do mine based on the slots and the holes because it makes it a little bit easier and it makes the warp spread out nicely. My first time across, I'm wrapping twice, and I'm going to go ahead and go from end to end to fill those in. And then when I go on my second pass to snug things up, I'm going to go ahead and just wrap once. So remember, this is just my first pass. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, I'm done with my first pass, so I'm gonna do a couple of different things. First, I'm going to tighten up the tension a little bit using my front apron rod. Then I'm gonna feel across to make sure the tension is even. All right, I'm gonna pull down a little bit here because it's a little bit tighter on this side of the warp. And I can see in this spot, it's a little bit soggy, so I'm going to go into that one individually and tighten it up a little bit. All right, so I have even tension all the way across. I'm going to go through with my second pass, and I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can. So I'm just tightening it up, and I'm going to tie a knot, just wrapping once, so your typical overhand knot. Okay, so here is the last step of our setup. The first thing I'm going to do is check for one last time that everything's in the right place. I'm going to do that by moving both heddles up and checking the shed. So I'm just looking between to make sure I don't have any twists. And here you might see a little bit of stickiness. That's fine if you do. All you have to do is put a little bit more tension on your warp, and that should go away. If it doesn't go away, then this is your last opportunity to go ahead and make any adjustments that you need to with your warp where it's tied on. Got a couple spots here that are a little bit sticky. And that's one of the reasons why you want to make sure that you're not using a very sticky yarn like wool, because then in between your heddles here, it could get all caught up and it'd be hard to tell if you had any twists. So that's the top shed. Now I'm going to go ahead and give the bottom shed a check. I'm looking for these to just pop up. These are my slot threads that should be rising to the top, and you can kind of help them along a little bit. All right, so as I'm looking through here, I don't have any of my whole threads that are stuck up here. Nothing's crossed or twisted at all. And that's what I'm looking for. So I'm putting them back in neutral. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to weave my header. So this is just some scrap that was left over from the curtain when I cut it off. I like to use this to weave my header because it slips, because it's all slippery and it'll come out really easily. So I'm going to just give this one more turn. Make sure it's nice and tight. When I'm weaving my header, I'm going to weave it as one flat layer. So I'm going to put both of my heddles on top. That brings all of my whole threads up above my slot threads. I'm going to go ahead and just clear that shed real quick. It's sticking a little. There we go. So I'm just going to take this at the end and push it through. And this is getting pulled out so it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to go ahead and switch so that I have both of my heddles down. you can do that one at a time. But one of the things that you don't want to do, if you have one of your heddles on top, it's hard to push the other heddle all the way down. So you want to go ahead and take them off one at a time, and then you can go ahead and push them into your bottom position, your down position, one at a time. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing where I pop off the front one first, pick up my second heddle, put it in the up position, and then move my heddle 1 to the top position. As I go across, I'm just pushing down to make sure that the ends for my slots are coming loose. So I've done 3 picks. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push that down to spread my warp. So when I look at the bottom here, I'll leave those up for a second. When I look at the bottom here, I'm checking to make sure that in each of these spots, I have an over and an under. And that helps me to make sure that all of my warp yarns are where they're supposed to be. I don't have any that are going straight from the bottom to the top. All right, so now my work is all set up. I'm gonna leave it in neutral for now.